Last meals are symbolic in nature and allow the prisoner one final comfort before being executed. Yet there are some inmates who use this last rite to make a statement. From inmates who requested dirt to inmates who requested so much food that the prison had to deny their last meal request. Here are some of the most insane last meals that have been requested on death row. Why did these prisoners request the items that they did? Was it to make a statement or for some other hidden motive? Let's find out together. Number 5. Victor Fegeur. The case of Victor Fegeur is peculiar not because of his crime, but because of the eerie symbolism in his final meal. But before we get to that, we have to ask the question, who was Victor Fegeur? Well, Fegeur was one of the last federal inmates to be executed before the ruling of Furman versus Georgia came into effect, which temporarily set aside the death penalty. Fegeur, who was a drifter, would rent out a room in the town of Dubuque, Iowa, and start scanning through the yellow pages for the number of physicians and would make a call to one Mr. Edward Bartell. He had told the doctor that a woman urgently needed help and that he would have to come as soon as possible. On arriving, Bartell would be held at gunpoint and kidnapped by Fegeur. Fegeur would then take Bartell's car and make him drive all the way to Illinois, where Fegeur would shoot and kill Bartell in the head with a single gunshot. Fegeur then attempted to sell the car, which was when he was caught. He argued that it was another raging addict who killed Bartell, but this theory fell flat in court when there was no evidence to back his theory up. Fegeur was sentenced to death by the court, and for his last meal, he requested just one single olive. Guess he wasn't hungry. Number 4. Timothy McVeigh. Although McVeigh's last meal is the most unexpected thing you can think of, the crime he committed certainly isn't. Timothy McVeigh's act of terrorism remains the largest act of domestic terrorism that has ever taken place on U.S. soil. McVeigh had a very unremarkable childhood with no incidents of crime marking his record. McVeigh was described as a shy person in school and would join the military as soon as he graduated from high school. McVeigh would get deployed to the Gulf War, where his actions on the front lines as a gunner would earn him a Bronze Star. McVeigh ended up being honorably discharged in 1991, but had developed strong anti-governmental rhetoric and feelings. This radicalization would eventually culminate in one single thought-out plan that he executed on April 19, 1995. McVeigh called on his military experience to load a van with ammonium nitrate fertilizer and fuel oil. He chose the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building as a target and detonated his truck bomb on the anniversary of the Waco siege to show solidarity with the victims. The bomb killed over 168 people and injured 600 others. McVeigh was eventually captured and sentenced to death by lethal injection. And what did he request for his final meal, you ask? Well, he requested 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. Apparently, McVeigh's radical ideas came with a soft spot for mint chocolate chip. And if you thought that was crazy, wait till you hear the next one. Number 3. Ronnie Lee Gardner. Ronnie's life and final meal request could inspire an entire movie on their own. Ronnie Lee Gardner was born in Salt Lake City, Utah in January of 1961. Ronnie was the youngest of 7 kids and had a father who was a heavy drinker who eventually abandoned the family to go start a new one. Gardner states that he was sexually abused by his siblings and was addicted to drugs and alcohol by the age of 10. Gardner's mother would remarry, and his new stepfather was nothing short of the worst role model one could have. Gardner's stepfather would use his kids as lookouts while he burglarized houses. Gardner was frequently moving in and out of juvenile detention centers and had indulged in a life of petty crime. But his first big crime would come when he attempted to rob a bar in his town. During the robbery, Gardner was under the influence of cocaine and would end up shooting bartender Melvin Otterstrom during this robbery. Gardner was eventually caught and sentenced to prison. But Gardner had no intention of staying in prison either. So while he was being escorted to his ride to the prison in the courthouse, Gardner made an attempt to escape and fatally shot bailiff Michael Burdell while trying to escape from the courthouse. The police once again caught Gardner, and for this crime, he was sentenced to death by firing squad. Gardner had no intention of going out in a modest manner and instead requested for his final meal steak, lobster tail, apple pie, vanilla ice cream, and 7-Up. But what's crazier is that he requested and watched the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy before being executed. Number 2. Odell Barnes Jr. When you hear what Odell Barnes Jr. requested for his last meal, you'll be taken aback for sure. Odell was the poster child for flawed prosecutions, as many human rights groups believe that Odell was prosecuted unfairly and was not given access to due process. But the nature of the crime Odell committed doesn't make it easy to feel any sympathy for him. So what sort of heinous crime did Odell do that warranted him getting the death sentence? Well, in November of 1989, Odell would choose the house of one Helen Bass to rob, but when Odell forced his way into her house, Helen was still present at the scene, which surprised him, as he believed that she would be at work while he committed the robbery. To compensate for this unprecedented development, he ended up robbing, beating, stabbing, and killing Helen with a shot to the head. There are some reports suggesting that she might have even been raped. Now, where do human rights come into all of this, you ask? Well, when Odell was arrested for his crime and put on trial, the jury was able to come to a guilty verdict within 3 hours of the hearing, wherein only the prosecution produced forensic evidence and an eyewitness testimony, while the defense for Odell, who was hired by the state, further complicated his defense. Barnes's prior record of 2 robberies didn't really help his case either. There was a large outcry from many groups like Amnesty International, who stated that Odell had been subject to a negligent trial and wanted his death sentence commuted. Despite many efforts, Odell's verdict was stayed, and his execution was scheduled for March 1, 2000, where he was ultimately executed by lethal injection. For his final meal, Odell Barnes Jr. did not seek any sort of nostalgic comfort, but rather asked for justice, equality, world peace. Now, if you think what Odell requested is crazy, wait till you see what our last entry on this list requested. Number 1. James Edward Smith. James Edward Smith was born in 1952 in Kentucky and worked as a tarot card dealer in New Orleans, Louisiana, but later went to work as a taxi driver in Houston, Texas. Smith was a self-proclaimed voodoo practitioner, but no one could have ever predicted what he would do next. On the morning of March 7, 1983, James, who was armed with a pistol and wearing a ski mask to protect his identity, would walk into the office of Union National Life Insurance Company in Houston and approach the teller's window, where he would threaten the teller to hand over all the money that was there in the cash register. The teller would refuse and hide behind a filing cabinet. In rage, James would turn his attention towards 44-year-old Larry Don Rojas, the company's district manager. Larry would comply with Edward's request and hand over the money, but James nonetheless shot Larry right in the head. James tried to flee but was tracked by the police and arrested for this crime. He was sentenced to death by the court for capital murder. And for his last meal, James requested Rayakunda dirt. You heard that right, dirt! Why did he request dirt, you ask? Well, he did so as he believed the dirt was fundamental in a voodoo ritual that would assist in his own reincarnation. But his request for this dirt was denied by the authorities, who told him he could only have something that met prison guidelines. James was finally executed on June 26, 1990, by lethal injection. Whether it was to make a statement, complete a ritual, or just savor one last taste of life, these final meals spoke louder than words ever could. If you found this fascinating, don't forget to subscribe for more bizarre and true stories from the darker side of humanity.